You didn't get here by chance. I need you to understand this before anything else. Before any words I'm going to say, before any ideas I'm going to share with you today. You didn't click on that video because you were bored. You didn't get here because you were simply scrolling aimlessly. No. There is something about you, something much deeper than your conscious mind can explain, that has brought you to this very moment. And Carl Jung called this symbolic destiny, life conspiring in silence to place before your eyes what your soul was already ready to receive. You've been through something. I don't know exactly what. It may have been a loss. It may have been a relationship that destroyed you on the inside while you were smiling on the outside. It may have been years, maybe decades, of feeling like you were different, but not being able to name that difference. Feeling that the world around you worked one way, and that you, for some reason that was never completely clear, worked another. As if everyone had received a manual on how to live, and yours had arrived blank, or in a language that no one else around you spoke. And for a long time you tried. You tried to fit in. He tried to reduce the intensity with which he felt things. He tried not to cry when the music played. He tried not to feel it so much. He tried not to absorb the pain of the people around him as if it were his own. He tried to pretend he didn't notice when someone was lying, even though their smile seemed perfect. You tried to ignore that inner voice that always knew more than you wanted to admit. But the truth is, you never succeeded. And do you know why? Because it wasn't possible. Because what exists within you is not a defect. It is not weakness. It's not too sensitive, as they said. It is not drama, as they classified. What exists inside you is a rare way of perceiving the world. And rare souls do not fit into ordinary molds. They break them. Silently. Inevitably. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying precisely these souls. He said that the greatest tragedy of human existence is not suffering. It is suffering without meaning. It is going through pain without understanding what it has come to transform. It's getting to the other side of a crisis without realizing that you're no longer the same person who walked into it. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you about today. About what you've been through, about what that means, and about who you've become, even if you haven't fully realized it yet. Because there is a test, not a test that you schedule, that you study, that you take sitting in a chair, a test of life, a test of the soul, and he doesn't tell you when it starts. It just happens, in the form of what broke you, what isolated you, what made you question everything you believed in about yourself and the world. And most people don't, not because they are bad people, but because they weren't ready to face what this test demands, the death of who you were, so that who you really are can finally breathe. You are watching this video. That tells me something about you that words could hardly describe. Tell me you passed. That something in you resisted when it should have collapsed. That something in you kept searching for meaning when it would be much easier to fall asleep. That something in you, even in your darkest moments, even when you doubted everything, didn't give up on itself completely. And today, I want you to feel it. May you breathe. May you allow what I am going to share here to come to you, not through your rational mind, but through that place within you that always knew there was something bigger going on. Because there is. There always was. And you, just you, with all that you carried, with every sleepless night, with every time you loved too much and received too little, with every moment you wondered if you were too much for this world, you did not come this far weakened. You got here transformed. Watch the pain no one saw, and the weight only you carried. There is a type of pain that does not appear in any exam, who has no name in medical diagnosis, that does not appear on the face of the bear. It is a silent, deep pain that lives in that space between what you feel and what the world around you can see. And you know that pain all too well. Not because someone told you about it, but because you've lived inside it for years, maybe your entire life, without being able to explain to anyone the size of what you were carrying. You woke up tired, not the fatigue of those who slept little, the fatigue of someone who spent the whole night processing emotions that were not even his own, of someone who entered an environment full of people and left there drained, as if something invisible had sucked his energy from the inside out. Where you felt what the people around you felt before they even opened their mouths. He knew when someone was lying, even with the perfect smile on his face. I felt the tension in the air before any words were spoken. And for a long time, you thought that this was a burden. That feeling so much was his biggest problem. But no one saw that. His family did not see it. His friends didn't see it. And cruelest of all, sometimes you tried not to see it yourself. I tried to stifle that sensibility that seemed too great for the world in which you lived. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that he was too sensitive, that it needed to be stronger, tougher, more armored. And every time you tried to do that, something inside you died a little bit. Not dramatically, silently. Like a light that decreases in intensity without anyone noticing, until the room gets dark and no one knows exactly when it happened. Carl Jung said that the human psyche has an extraordinary capacity to survive, but that this survival comes at a price. When we can't express what we are, when the environment around us can't stand the intensity of our soul, we learn to hide it. We create masks. Jung called it a persona, the face we show to the world to be accepted, to function, to not be seen as strange or problematic. And for years, you wore that mask so skillfully that you almost forgot it was a mask. You learned to smile at the right times, saying that he was fine when he wasn't, to minimize your own pain so as not to burden others. Precisely you who already carried the pain of everyone around you without anyone asking. What you have become an expert in caring, in listening, to be present for others in a way that almost no one has ever been present for you. And that was not weakness. It was an extraordinary adaptation of a soul that needed to find its place in a world that was not yet ready to understand it. But the weight was getting too big. And at some point, you know exactly what that moment was, even if you can't put it into words. Something broke. Not you. Not its essence. What broke was the fake structure you had built to survive. And this break, as painful as it was the first sign that his soul refused to go on living halfway. She wanted more. She deserved more. And she was willing to destroy everything that was false to find what was real. This pain that no one saw was, in fact, the beginning of everything. The test life uses to separate the sleeper from the awakening. Life does not announce its tests. She does not send a summons. He does not warn in advance. It simply puts before you a situation, a loss, a betrayal, a breakdown, an emptiness that appears out of nowhere on an ordinary morning, and observes what you do with it. And it is exactly at this moment, in this space between the blow and the response, that who you really are revealed. Not who you thought you were, not the persona you've built over the years, but the essence that was waiting in silence for a gap to emerge. Carl Jung called these moments enantiodromia, the point at which a thing turns into its opposite, the moment when life as you knew it reaches its maximum limit and begins to turn inside out. It is the point at which the darkness becomes so intense that the only possible direction is the light. But getting to that light requires something most people aren't willing to do, staying in the dark long enough for the eyes to adapt. Most people avoid testing, not because they are cowards, but because no one teaches that testing has a purpose. So when the pain comes, the instinct is to anesthetize it, occupy the mind, seek distractions, find someone or something to fill the void quickly before it speaks too loudly. And it works for a while. But the emptiness does not disappear. He just waits. Because he's not your enemy. He's your teacher. And patient teachers always find a way to deliver the lesson. You didn't run away, or maybe you tried, and the test caught up with you anyway. Because that is how it works for the souls who have come here to awaken. There is no permanent escape. There is only the postponement of the inevitable. And when the inevitable came, when you found yourself alone in the face of a pain that could not be ignored, something different happened. Instead of just surviving, a part of you began to observe, questioning, to look for meaning in what seemed to have none. This is the moment that separates the sleeper from the awakening. Not the absence of pain, not the absence of crisis, but the ability to look at the crisis and ask, what is this trying to show me? Who am I being called to become? What in me needs to die so that something truer can live? These questions are not easy. They require a courage that goes far beyond physical courage. They require the courage to face their own shadow, to admit that parts of you that you didn't like to see existed and needed to be integrated, To accept that suffering was not punishment, it was an invitation, a brutal, painful invitation, often unfair in the way it arrived, but a genuine invitation to a version of you that wasn't yet allowed to exist. You accepted that invitation, and that changes everything. The shadow that frightened you was the most powerful part of you. Jung spent decades studying what he called the shadow, not evil, not the monster. The shadow is simply everything that has been rejected, suppressed, hidden throughout life. Everything you learned from an early age that was not safe to show. Your anger, your need, your desire to be seen, your desire to take up space, your ability to say no. Everything that the world around him, his family, his culture, his experiences, classified as inadequate, was pushed into the shadows. And there he stayed, waiting. For a sensitive soul like yours, the shadow is often especially frightening, because you've spent your whole life trying to be good, trying not to hurt anyone, trying to be the person who cares, who supports, who is present. The idea that inside you existed something that didn't fit that image, something that wasn't kind, that wasn't patient, that didn't want to give in anymore, was terrifying. So you pushed further down. I ignored more. He pretended that he did not exist. But the shadow has a property that Jung described with surgical precision. The more you ignore it, the more power it accumulates. It's like trying to hold an inflatable ball underwater. You use all your energy to keep it submerged, and it keeps pressing. One waiting for the moment when your arms get tired. And when they get tired, it rises with a much greater force than it would have if it had simply been left on the surface from the start. The moments when you reacted in ways that you didn't understand. The times when he caught himself with disproportionate anger at something small. The relationships that inexplicably became stages of patterns that you swore you would never repeat. Self-sabotage in moments when everything seemed to be fine. All of this was the shadow trying to be seen, not to destroy you, but to be integrated, to be recognized as part of you, because it is part of you. And to reject a part of yourself is to reject the whole of yourself. Shadow integration is not a pretty process. It doesn't happen on a spiritual retreat weekend. It's a slow, and often uncomfortable process of looking at what you didn't want to see and saying, this is me too. This side of me that gets angry is also valid. This part of me that wants to be seen also deserves space. That voice inside me that says no also has wisdom. And when you start doing that, when you start to stop fighting yourself, something extraordinary happens. The energy you spent repressing the shadow is free, and this energy is immense. It's creative, it's passionate, it's powerful in a way that you've never experienced when you were divided against yourself. The integrated shadow is not your weakness. It is your deepest strength finally released. What scared you was, in fact, what I was waiting for to complete you. The death of the old self, when losing everything is the beginning of everything. There is a paradox at the heart of all true transformation. To become who you really are, you need to lose who you thought you were. And this loss is not a metaphor. It is real. It hurts. It leaves marks. It has the weight of a grief. Because it is a grief, you're bearing a version of yourself. He is saying goodbye to beliefs that he has carried for years. Relationships that no longer fit who you are becoming. To a way of existing in the world that no longer reflects what is truest within you. Jung called this process symbolic death, and he did not use this expression lightly. He had observed, in decades of working with the human psyche, that the greatest transformations always pass through a breaking point, a moment when the old structure completely collapses before the new one can be erected, like a building that needs to be demolished before it can be rebuilt. You don't reform what's at the bottom. You go down to the foundation and start over from there. For you, this moment may have come in different ways. A loss that no one expected, an end that came before you were ready, a discovery that changed everything you believed to be true, or simply a tiredness so deep, so total, that one morning you woke up and knew, without anyone having to say it, that it was no longer possible to continue in the same way, that the life you were living was no longer your life. It was the life you had built to survive, and surviving was no longer enough. And to lose one's old identity is to lose the security it provided. Even when that identity was painful, it was known. And the human being has a complex relationship with the family member. He prefers the suffering he knows to the unknown that may be better, but it is still uncertain. That's why so many people cling to who they've always been, even when those who have always been are no longer useful. It's safer. It's more predictable. Even if it's a prison, you chose differently, or maybe life has chosen for you. Sometimes that's how it works for souls who need a more forceful push. Anyway, you found yourself standing outside the prison, staring at it without the key back. And in that space between what was and what is not yet, in that emptiness that scares you so much, lives the germ of everything you are becoming. The death of the old self is not the end. It is the turning point. It is the moment when the chrysalis breaks, and what emerges is not an improved version of what existed before. It is something fundamentally different, something that carries the memory of what was, but is no longer limited by it. Something that passed through the fire and came out the other side not destroyed, but refined. You missed a lot, and everything he lost, he had to lose to get here. The silence that precedes rebirth, solitude as initiation. There is a moment in every great transformation that no one talks about. It's not the time for crisis. That's what everyone mentions. It is not the time of rebirth. That is celebrated. It is the middle moment, the silence between what has died and what has not yet been born. Oh, the emptiness that settles after the storm passes and before the sun comes up. A space of stillness that, for those who do not understand its purpose, seems abandoned. It looks like failure. It seems that something has gone wrong, but it didn't work. This silence is sacred. Jung studied the rites of passage of cultures around the world and found a universal pattern. Every true initiation goes through a period of isolation. The initiate is removed from the community. He is alone, sometimes literally in the dark, without the usual landmarks of everyday life, without the relationships that defined his identity, without the structures that told him who he was. And in this isolation, something happens that could not happen otherwise. The initiate meets himself. No distractions, no masks, no audience. Like you've probably gone through your own period of isolation. It may have been physical, a time when you withdrew from people, environments, and situations that once made up your life. Or it may have been internal, a loneliness you felt even surrounded by people, a distance between you and the world around you that no conversation could completely bridge, a sense that you were in a place that others just couldn't reach. This isolation was not punishment, it was protection. His psyche and its infinite wisdom created the conditions for the transformation to happen without interference. Because true transformation is fragile in its first moments, like a freshly lit flame that the slightest wind can extinguish. She needs silence, it needs space, it needs a stillness that the noisy and demanding world cannot offer. And in that silence, things began to emerge. Perceptions you had never had, clarity about relationships that have always confused you. A new understanding, not intellectual but visceral, of who you are and what really matters to you. An inner voice that had always been there, but that the noise of everyday life had covered up, began to make itself heard. And what she said, even if it came gradually, even if it came in fragments, was unlike anything you'd heard before. Because it was true, it was his. Initiatory solitude is not forever. It has a purpose and an end. But it needs to be completed, not interrupted prematurely for fear of what might arise in the silence. People who flee from this silence, who fill every empty space with noise so that they don't have to listen to what stillness has to say, don't go through initiation. They remain in the middle of the road, neither the old person they were, nor the new person they could become. You were silent, and what has come to you in it will sustain everything that comes now. The new identity that has no turning back. You're no longer who you were. We have reached the end of this journey, but not the end of yours. Because what happens now is not a closure. It is an opening. It is the moment when you realize, perhaps for the first time with total clarity, that the person who started this journey is not the same as the one who got here. Not a slightly modified version, not someone who learned some new things, a fundamentally different person, with a different relationship with herself, with the world, with what is possible, with what is real. The Jung described the process of individuation, this path of becoming who one really is, as something that, once started, cannot be reversed. Not because it is impossible to go back, but because the consciousness that has been expanded cannot contract again. Once you've seen it, you can't help but see it. Once you know, you can't not know anymore. The new identity is not something you choose to use or not use depending on the day. She is who you are now, irreversibly. And this manifests itself in everything. In the way you receive love, you no longer accept crumbs because you know what you deserve. In the way you deal with your limits, you no longer apologize for having them because you understand that they are an expression of self-knowledge, not selfishness. When in the way you relate to your own pain, you no longer run away from it because you have learned that it always carries a message and that the message is worth listening to. In the way you position yourself in the world, no longer trying to fit into spaces that are too small for what you are, but occupying the space that is rightfully yours. The new identity is silent. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need external validation. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. There is a stillness in her that people around her perceive without being able to name. A solidity, a presence, a way of being that conveys something that goes beyond words. You haven't just changed what you think about yourself. You have changed what you radiate. And people in situations that are not aligned with this new energy field naturally begin to drift away. Not because you expel them, but because the frequency has changed. This can be scary at times. Some relationships no longer fit who you are. Some environments have become small. Some conversations seem superficial in a way that they didn't seem to before. And that doesn't mean you become superior or that you look down on others. It means you've grown up. And genuine growth always reorganizes the environment. Carl Jung said that the greatest gift a human being can give to the world is to become completely himself. Not the version that others expected, not the version that fear has built, the real integrated version which passed through the fire and came out the other side more whole than it entered. Because when you become completely yourself, you release everyone around you from the obligation to complete you. You stop looking outside for what can only be found inside, and in that completeness, you become able to love yourself, others, life, in a way that was simply impossible before. You are no longer who you were, and it never will be again. And that, exactly that, is the best news you could receive today. Welcome to the other side.